And good evening from the Sutton Lecture Theatre on the campus of Imperial College here in London, and welcome to the third and final debate of the 27th season of the Montgomery Cup. Tonight's debate features Rebecca Curry and Priscilla Guerra from Lee College, Jordan Guillot from Louisiana State University Shreveport, and Caleb Lub Wands from the University of Central Missouri, against the teams from our host school, Imperial College. I'm Jordan Compton, Director of Forensics at the University of Central Missouri, and I'm joined once again by the newly retired Professor Emeriti and creator of the Montgomery Cup, Dr. Jack Rogers. So, Jack, we are well into our prep time. It seems that our debaters are starting to file in. Our motion on the table tonight is this House opposes the popularization of therapy speak. What are we looking forward to here?
Well, the government, is going to try to basically uphold the resolution that, the use or overuse of, therapy terms, OCD, ADHD, those kinds of things. Yeah, toxic gaslighting, that those things have a overall detriment, and that they're trying too hard, and of course I think the opposition is going to say no, being able to talk about those things probably normalizes things to a certain extent and allows people the space to be themselves. I think that's the way it will go. You never know how they interpret things when they get rolling. Always a good debate with Imperial. This is the Stanford of England, and so all of these guys we're debating are all like physics and electrical engineering and mechanical engineering. The guy that's adjudicating Mac is finishing his PhD in materials, but he says physics because that's easiest for people to understand. But we had him last year. He was part of the tradition.
So our debaters are now introducing themselves to each other, so we are going to turn it over to Mac, our chief adjudicator, and he's going to lead us through what should be an excellent debate, and then Jack and I will be back after the debate is over with and the adjudication begins.
Before we start, just to be clear, Donald will be banging on the table 1 minute and 6 minutes to indicate technical time for information.
Is it 7 minutes?
7 minutes.
Panel, thousands of people last year took their lives to depression and other mental health illnesses. We think it's embarrassing that this morning some people could have gone on their group chats and said that I'm depressed just because they've been having a bad morning. So proud to propose 2 points we're going to bring you. One, that using therapy speech trivializes the issue and makes it harder to solve accurately with accurate treatments. Two, we think it makes it harder for people who lack sufficient education about these issues to be able to access the information that's going to help them. But first, 3 pieces of context. First, we think that these conditions are treated differently, and specifically here we're talking about the difference between physical conditions and mental health conditions, right? And I think this is very, very obvious in our daily speech, right? If someone is describing a physiological problem that they're having, the way we react to it is very, very different to the way we react if someone is going to describe symptoms of a mental health issue, right? If I'm telling you that I've been really anxious in the morning, you're not going to have the same severity of reaction as if I told you that I was throwing up blood, for example. Second point of context. We think that the people that are using this language, i.e. therapy speak, already have access to accurate information about what these mental health illnesses look like, right? And we think that's for three reasons. The first is because of their social circles. So often these people live in like wealthy inner city areas where their schools, their colleges are already giving them accurate information. So this language has already been normalized for them since they were quite young. So they're comfortable in being able to use that language. And this works as a kind of mirror, right? So if I'm able to use this language in front of someone else, they're going to feel more comfortable using it in front of someone else. But notice that the important thing about this is the context in which you use this, right? So it's very, very different for me to say that that I feel like I have OCD just because my room is messy versus I'm feeling that I have OCD because I'm finding it hard to breathe when something really minor is going wrong, right? So the context in which they use this language matters. Second thing, that there is the fact that there's some level of education shows us about these mental health issues, shows why this language got there in the first place, right? Because otherwise it wouldn't exist in the scenarios it's being talked about. And lastly, it's because there's not enough scientific information, right? So the way in which that these words are used are not accurately used in the way that they're used in scientific terminology. But notice that these words are the same, right? So OCD is the same word that's used in therapy speak and that's used in scientific literature no later. And that's really important. The third point of context is that it's often said in a joking way. And that's really important, right? Because I think this is the difference between you taking someone seriously when they're actually talking to you about their problems versus taking it as a joke. Given this, we think that the delta in this debate is not education. So it's not people finding out about these illnesses in the first place. Rather, it's whether or not you would have the people who already know about these illnesses taking them more seriously and treating them as an important illness, and having accurate awareness as opposed to them taking it as a joke. There's two questions we think that we need to answer in this debate. First, is therapy speak the only way to education? And second, does it provide significant amounts of education to overcome the trivialization, which we say is the biggest problem with therapy speak? Let's move on to our points. The first on trivialization, three things underneath here. First, the fact that three ways in which trivialization happens. First, that there's a separation from the medical aspects, right? So there's lots of physiological and identifiable traits of mental health illnesses that have been well recorded in literature, that we think that the same language is used and then basically used in trivial language in day-to-day life. Second, it's used in the normalization of day-to-day activities. This is really important because when you're using this language every single day, you become desensitized to it, right? And this happens in loads of different other kinds of aspects in your life. If you see photos on Instagram of people dying every day in places like Syria or Gaza, you become desensitized to it because you're so used to seeing it, and you essentially start to block it out of your mind. The third thing is that you reduce the severity of this, right? So you can't then accurately tell when someone's joking and when someone's not joking. So that means that when someone's actually coming to you with a problem, you won't be able to tell the difference. Why is trivialization bad? Three things. One, you're less likely to look for treatment. That's for two reasons. One, there's a mechanism of self-doubt and self-questioning, right? Because you're not sure in and of yourself whether or not you've actually passed the threshold, right, for this to be an actual mental health illness, or whether it's just something that you've been joking about with your friends. Second, it's harder for professionals to recognize whether or not you're being serious, because the likelihood is that even with other people that have come to them, they're not able to differentiate between whether or not something is serious. And lastly, it means that these mental health illnesses are essentially treated as separate from like physical health problems, right? So you end up having yeah, go ahead.
If the people that you say are the ones actively using therapy speak are the people who have the most access to resources on therapy speak and what these speech types mean, why won't these people just know what they are to begin with because they already have the resources like you characterize them?
They know what they are, right? But they're using it as a joke, right? So that's the difference here. I can know about physical health problems like cancer, but the thing I don't do is joke about the symptoms on my group chat in private, right? That's the difference here. But people do that with mental health illnesses. Okay, why is it bad for people who then don't have their language in circles, which my partner is going to expand on? What this essentially means is that because these illnesses or these symptoms are now taken as a joke, as soon as you are a person who's been exposed to this, and this is not something you generally talk about in your social circle, it means that when you do bring it out for the first time, you're taken as a joke, right? Because the only way that these people have heard of this is like from people joking about this in movies or with their friends. It's not taken in as a serious example. The key thing in this debate is that we provide a mechanism for which these serious illnesses are like taken in a serious manner and not made fun of in a way that will harm people in the future. So proud to propose.
I'd like to have a speaker. That's my speech. Now welcome to lead your position here.
Something that's important in everybody's life is understanding what is out there. What is there available to us? And so when we are faced with the resolution today of this House opposes the popularization of therapy speak, we need to be in firm opposition of this entire resolution. We need to understand that this resolution is going to be harmful for the future of how we understand and handle therapy, how we understand and handle people who have mental disabilities, mental health complications, mental health needs. We need to understand this throughout the entirety of today's debate. And so when we go at this, we have three main points that we need to look at here. So we need to acknowledge that I need help. I need help. You need help. This entire room needs help with their mind. We need to understand that there are things within us that we do not understand, that we need to further elaborate upon and understand going forward in today. So when we understand these things, we can advocate for ourselves, that we can find acceptance within ourselves and with the people around us. And that is just the first step going forward. That is just the tip of the iceberg when we understand mental health. And so going forward, we also need to understand how this affects our interpersonal life. That's the next point that we're going to bring up here, is that interpersonal life, it needs to be understood. That, like I said, y'all understand that you have differences, that you think a little differently than I do. And we... Sure.
Okay, so you say that labels are terms, like, would you say that labels like OCD or ADHD help other people understand those people more?
It helps me understand myself. That's what I'm going to go with here, is that as somebody who just personally struggles with ADHD and was first having to use the guise of myself and self-diagnosis to get to that point where I can finally actually get diagnosed, which I now am. It's something that is very important to understand that, yeah, it's the first step in understanding yourself and how the symptoms and diagnoses going forward actually work. And so what we see here is that we need to understand that there's something called adaptive speech, because once we understand in an interpersonal setting that we need to adapt and change for the person sitting across from us, having a conversation with us, because we don't want to say something that upsets them. We don't want to say something that's going to turn them away from the entire conversation, because that's just leading away somebody that you just genuinely wanted to talk to about a certain topic that needs to be talked about. And if you don't say, hey, I'm going to talk about something that's going to be maybe depressing, going to be potentially traumatizing, I don't want you to understand that, okay, I don't want to engage in that content. Can we maybe skip ahead past that point. Get to the point where we can actually talk about something that can impact both you and I, being something that can be equitable for all of us. Be something that we understand that we, as people, don't have the same opportunities for everything. Equitable. Being treated equally versus being treated equitably are two different things. We need to be treated equitably in these scenarios. Understanding that everybody needs to have the opportunity to be treated as we want to be treated. We need to understand that we, as people, understand that there is a right to be treated equitably. We need to understand that everybody has different mental capacities. We need to understand everybody has something that is different around them. No, thank you. We need to understand this, because the second we don't, we go from a world that understands that therapy speak is somewhat dangerous for us. We go from a world that does not see the point of therapy speak. And what do we actually get from the benefits of therapy speak? We get nothing if we go to the government's world. We get it a step back. We take a step in the wrong direction. And while we see on the opposition side, we understand ourselves. We understand the world around us. And we understand that we need to go forward. We need to treat others equitably. And so when we tackle into the opposition's case, sure, first question, last question that I'll take.
Do you support mental health self-diagnosis?
I think it's important to understand that there's something, accepting that there's stuff wrong, like I said at the very beginning. So I would say that it should be something that you understand can help. It's not something that's going to be inherently wrong. And at the end of the day, what's the worst that can happen? You're wrong? Okay, fine, but you found out that there's something else, that there might be something else there for you, that overall, that you can be okay with what your results are in the end. Nothing has to be cut and dry here and today. So when we tackle the government speech that they see here, is that they just say, well, there's a potentiality that somebody's joking, so we shouldn't take anything serious, which is not something we should honestly take in stride as something that is fact. Not everybody is just joking of like, oh, I have OCD, oh, I have ADHD as a little quirky little thing. They're saying it because typically they want to seek help. They want to have those options, but they either do not have the money for those options, either do not have the accessibility to those options to get diagnosed. So it's going to be something that we need to understand forever and in the future, that we need to understand that it should not be treated as a joke. And when the government sits here and tells us that it's all built upon a joke, we are not taking mental health seriously from the get-go. We're not saying that there is something that is going to be truly taken seriously. And if we are sitting here as the opposition, we need to uphold therapy speak to understand that that's not going to be beneficial for anybody's future. If we just sit here and say, well, they might be joking, so let's not take it serious. We need to take it serious no matter what. We need to understand that there is the likelihood that it can be serious, and so we should. And that's why I stand in firm opposition today. Thank you.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. So the debate has been very poor so far, in my opinion, but not as poor as my mental health if we were to trivialize all of this therapy speak and what mental illness is in the first place, right? So I'm going to provide you with an alternative that the opposition has completely forgotten about, and also mention to you why we've already proved to you that awareness is already decreased in severity. I am going to tell you why the awareness will be non-existent in the first place, right? So firstly, I would like to provide some rebuttals to the opposition team. So the opposition team concedes that self-diagnosis is important, self-diagnosis is important, and people need to go to doctors because of that self-diagnosis, and not in that mental health resources are incredibly important as well. Well, I think that opposition forgets that we're living in the real world where mental health resources are incredibly limited in the first place, where we are struggling to find doctors. The NHS is currently facing an overload of mental illness patients, and as a result are not able to cope with the workload in the first place. So therefore, if you were to bring about every single child, 13-year-old who has self-diagnosed themselves with ADHD into the NHS and diagnose themselves there, I think that's incredible waste of our resources in the first place, and therefore I don't think that point should be credited at all, right? So I'm going to go into what exactly is the alternative on our side, right? So we don't want therapy speak to exist at all. We feel that therapy speak is a form of jargon that is watered down to the public, where it's supposed to be used by doctors and patients in the first place, right? And take, for example, you hear words like severe depression, you hear words like gaslighting, toxic relationship, but only people in that context, or in people who therapists or doctors in that situation, hearing about the situation in the first place, would understand, right? So if the general public were to use these words just trivially in a conversation, would they actually understand the severity of what they are saying? I will argue not, because the general public does not have a medicine degree. The general public does not have the education to understand what it means by severe depression, and as a result, therapy speak from a professional language will go into just watered down language that anyone can use. Not only that, we believe that therapy speak will be labeling, right? So take, for example, if you were to talk about, like, if someone was trying to convince you of a topic, or like your partner is trying to bring you around to something, right? So in this situation, a lot of people can misread the situation and say, oh, this convincing, they are convincing is actually a way of assertiveness or way of gaslighting, right? And in this situation, and not only that, like, take, for example, normal fights between friends or partners can be seen as so-called abusive if we do not control it, if we do not clearly define what exactly therapy speak in the first place, which I will argue later on in my speech, right? So not in this situation, we believe that the alternative is that we increase our mental health campaigns, we increase our mental health resources in the first place, right? We have outreach for mental health in the first place, and as a result, we do not need this therapy speak whatsoever, and therefore and this is our current alternative as the government, right? So we have talked to you about the awareness of the severity of the situation. So, but I would like to bring to your attention, do people even know what it is when they're talking about, right? What is depression in the first place, right? So the current form of popularization is labeling situations, giving a context, and then after that describing them, and then people get context from it, right? So in this situation, there's not really a clear definition for the labels. Some people will just take it as it is. Take, for example, if like a toxic relationship, someone just describes it, and people will just take it as it is and say, oh yeah, that's toxic, and frame it in their heads as toxic, right? So in this situation, you are essentially taking questionable situations and framing it so that you can apply this therapy speech when it's not necessarily true. As a result, you are taking this jargon that is supposed to be used in a professional setting by professionals, and you are labeling it for especially those who are vulnerable. Take, for example, teenagers who do not understand what this therapy speaks in the first place, and taking it and reframing this in their head, and as a result, you're creating a new generation of people who do not, who have the awareness of a wrong version of what this therapy speak actually means, right? Take for example, take for example, every 13-year-old on TikTok believes they have ADHD, although realistically they only have a short attention span, right? And as a result, since there's no clear line for labels, therefore we believe as the government there's increase of this such misuse, and thus we are bringing around the wrong type of awareness. Yes?
If you conceive that people in the status quo don't understand these conditions because they're not medical, do you think that we should strive to help increase this education to create a deeper level of understanding around it?
Well, we believe that comes on to my point that we believe that the general public already has resources such as the internet. We already have campaigns. We already have a greater understanding of what mental health is, not through the popularization of such language in the first place, but through the media that take for example the hospitals put out, the government puts out, right? So in this situation, we believe that these forms of media are much more healthy to understand what mental illnesses are, what abusive relationships are, instead of taking it from some random commenter on TikTok, right? So obviously, you can argue that finding it on take for example Google is not very good for self-diagnosis. It will be a cyclical argument of you're self-diagnosing yourself. But I will argue that again, in some way, you have to. Government organizations and also the internet is a good way for understanding what these symptoms are and what you have in the first place. And as long as we are not watering down the language that the internet uses or governments or hospital use, then we are able to reliably predict and diagnose ourselves to the extent that the opposition wants in the first place, and therefore that's why we take over them. And thus I end my speech here. Thank you.
The English language is perfect, has no problems, it never needs to be updated or changed. It's simply the best way to speak in any way possible. Now that's a brilliant example of some pretty bad gaslighting, but the very idea here at the government side is bringing up is this idea that language, one, is immutable and should never be changed. We should never update the meanings of words. And overall, we should just sit there and accept what doctors and everyone gives us and never actually do anything for ourselves. Well, as side opposition has already brilliantly brought up and shown you today, there are many, many beautiful reasons as to why you should be looking to, one, self-diagnosis to help yourself figure out what is wrong with you, but then two, to be able to use therapy speak, to be able to talk about how your feelings are going and how you are feeling. It is actually inherently positive to do so, and going with the government's world of essentially shutting down this language and saying, well, in some cases, for some reason, we're going to allow you to do self-diagnosis if you go to Google versus reading some random TikTok comment. But in reality, the very idea here is, in general, you have to actually show in some way that therapy speak is actually causing negative issues within the current status quo. I'll take my first of two questions.
A really important part of the English language is studying the context in which words are used. Do you not agree?
I absolutely agree, yes, and that's why we look at the context in which people use them in modern day. If we didn't do that, then why would we have dictionaries that update in the first place? Why would we add random words that we end up getting essentially memed or joked about online, when in reality it's the very ideas that we look at as to how we change language as a whole? So going into what I think is going to be the most important point here for side opposition is this last point we're going to bring up, this idea of demonization versus destigmatization. We're looking at this fact that, in general, popular things within society kind of operate on this idea of a pendulum, right? You start off with something maybe not being accepted whatsoever. In this case, we're talking about the idea of talking about yourself emotionally, whether this is in general talking to a professional or talking to just your friends about how you feel, getting something different out of yourself from this. This used to be completely and utterly shunned because you were told to basically, well, just get over it. Now we're at this point where, in general, we see this idea of people are more willing to go out and say, hey, I think I have a problem. I might be depressed. I think I feel overly anxious about this problem. I think I might have ADHD. I can't focus in class, at work, whatever. We're seeing that this is generally becoming more and more accepted everywhere you go. And so the government side is coming up here and telling you, well, people are using these words not to the academic definition, therefore we should just not use them whatsoever, or in reality, we should only allow a doctor to tell you exactly what is wrong with you. Well, absolutely, as side opposition, we're not arguing for people to just suddenly know every little thing about one, medical textbooks, God forbid, but then two, the very idea of what we're doing in terms of actually discussing our own feelings. What side opposition is arguing for is that people should have the ability to describe themselves via language. Having therapy speak, this idea of saying, I might have an issue with obsessive compulsive disorder, or I might have issues paying attention. It might be more than just your standard everyday sort of view of this. You have to be able to discuss these things without actually being shown, hey, you can't do this anymore. I'll take my second question.
All right, so you say that therapy speak destigmatizes basically mental health terms.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the people who use these terms and mislabels people's characters or unique quirks for something else? So
assuming you're talking about when other people describe someone else as depressed or anxious or things like that, when you look to the idea of what this might be, this is if anything, while there might be some situations in which this is not the most accurate label for someone, I think other people analyzing your behavior, look, you are not necessarily always the best judge of your own character. Having other people look at you and identify what may or may not be wrong or good for you is something that's important, especially if they know you very well. So what we should be looking at is that, well, is this a positive or negative thing? I'd argue in general, it is positive to have. Rather than shutting down the language that the government is essentially arguing for, we should be actually pushing for the idea of people being educated about what they are talking about rather than taking this away from them. So what I want to bring up is this very idea of what is going on in the general consensus, right? When we look at what is happening in the status quo in terms of this therapy speak, I've already mentioned that we're kind of swinging back and forth on this pendulum of what is not popular at all and what is essentially too popular, as the government is arguing. But what we're really seeing is that we have to reach a slow and steady middle ground. And that's generally what happens with everything that happens in society, right? One of the big examples I can bring up is actually the amount of LGBTQ people that exist within the world, right? We've seen a general rise in the amount that exists, but it's not like suddenly everyone is gay, as some people like to say. It's mainly the very idea that overall people are more okay coming out with these things. They're more okay being open with their friends, their family, people around them. So we see a natural increase. It's a very similar thing in how people are using therapy speak more. What we have not seen from side government is an actual unique harm that actually shows we should stop using therapy speak whatsoever. We have to actually look at what the rejection of this language would actually mean for everyone in the status quo. And what we haven't seen at all, and what we've only ever seen from the opposition, is the positives that we get from looking at having this idea of how you can discuss yourself. One of the last things I want to talk about is what the opening government said, essentially about the idea of, well, people won't take this seriously because they consider it a joke. The biggest point, the biggest thing that's really relevant here, as was already brought up a little bit by my partner, is this idea that you have to be able to show that this one potential tiny negative is going to outweigh every benefit that we're going to get from being able to discuss these feelings. I don't think this has been brought up enough, this very idea of how can you discuss yourself, how can you grow as a person. I'm not going to be taking your question. The very ideas that we're discussing here is not of over-exaggerating every little thing that you do. All we're looking at today on side opposition is the very idea that you should be able to use these terms. You should be able to learn about them. Because if we're looking at what is the marketplace of ideas of what's going to be important for people to learn and understand, you have to be able to go in and potentially self-diagnose yourself to get into a better place. The opening government likes to say, well, the system's already overloaded, we can't get in there, it's totally a bad problem. Well, good news, that's why it's actually important for you to be able to go and look up information about it and potentially self-diagnose yourself. Because then you're doing work that the doctor will not have to take the extra time to do. You're making the system actually have less load. So what we're seeing is that overall, the very idea of the House opposing the popularization of this therapy speak, once again, we have seen no unique harms to people besides this potential idea of maybe diluting words. But in reality, what we're seeing is an actual expansion of the definitions of these words, the meanings that they mean to everyone who's using them, and the ability for people to push themselves forward while not being held back by what they used to believe. Thank you.
That's my speech, and I would like to welcome each and every government person back on the debate here.
Therapy speak has been popularized throughout our society and has permeated throughout our society as well. Now, going into our closing government points. As we touch on the other government side, we really want to clarify what we're talking about here, especially when the debate kind of gets a little muddled. Going on to the opening government, they mentioned that any type of therapy speak that is not used in the context of a physical room or talking with your therapist, or not used in a medical terminology, is bad. We say as a closing government that therapy speak, the popularization of it, is bad, not the actual general usage of it. And that's why the bench should choose closing government rather than OG, because we show why the popularization of therapy speak is bad, not the general usage. And we'll get into that with our practical points later. What we really want to clarify here is the principal argument that is going to win over the bench for the closing government here today. Now, this principal argument is really going to show how we are unique comparative to the other government bench. Now, what is this principal argument? The principal argument here is this. We dehumanize people when we boil them down to a simple label. When I ask the opposition in questioning that, do these labels actually help us understand who people actually are? They say, yes, it's a good thing. Labeling people is a good thing. I say it definitely isn't. Why is it? Why is labeling people not a bad thing? Well, when we label people, we practically dehumanize them. We don't get to know them on an emotional level, because as human beings, we really want to take the easy route, and putting a label like OCD or ADHD on someone really helps us boil them down to their simplest form. And that's a bad thing, because we no longer want to engage in them later. Again, this is bad because we no longer look at people's quirks or habits as their personality, but simply as a conclusion or a symptom of whatever we diagnose them as. We look at people as things we want to solve, and no longer as friends that we want to make connections with. Now let's get into the practical points that we'll actually talk about here today. So the first one is patronization, right? My government came over here and kind of touched on this a little bit. As a closing government, we're really going to expand on the points that they didn't really cover here. Now, why is patronizing bad, right? People who actually have these disorders, who actually have ADHD and OCD, when people go out there and use therapy speak willy-nilly by saying, oh, I have OCD, simply because they like to have their pens in a certain order, practically dehumanizes and actually commodifies the people who actually go through these experiences, and that in turn devalues their experiences. It demeans their experiences. Why is this important? Well, the impact of this is that patronizing people's mental disorders is bad because it undermines their struggles, and again, it demeans what they're going through on a day-to-day basis. And why is this important? Is because literal mental health issues are now being used in a joking manner, like the government alluded to. Let's go on to the second practical point, which is being that of the chilling effect. The reason why this is really important is because the opposition comes up here and says demonization versus destigmatization, right? And I come up there and I say, well, does this actually destigmatize things if we mislabel people, or later, if we mislabel people, especially if we just simply look at their quirks and habits and want to label it as such? People are too scared to say things in order to not trigger anyone else, right? The opposition says we should be careful what we say and we should have an open space. Well, how do we know that this open space doesn't go further than that, right? For example, when we look at a university setting, professors or students are too scared to say something to trigger people. And why is this bad? Well, it's bad for the marketplace of ideas, the marketplace of innovation, for people to actually have discussions about these mental health disorders without trying to trigger anyone else. Let's get on to the third point, which is being that of weaponization. The good point about here is Jonah Hill. He practically told his girlfriend to not hang out with any other guys because that triggers him and that goes against his boundaries. Why is this important? Well, it's important because people use therapy speak and weaponize it against other people to not do those things. It practically manipulates them to work in their favor, like Jonah Hill did to manipulate his girlfriend to not hang out with practically any other people. I'll take the first of my two questions. Go ahead.
You mentioned this idea with Jonah Hill and the problems that he had
right.
using this therapy speak on his girlfriend. So wouldn't a fix of essentially educating more people on what these words actually mean fix the very problems that are caused by something like that?
That's the very thing, because people have access to the internet all the time. They can access what these terms mean all the time. But the matter of fact is that they don't use these terms in a correct manner because it's so popularized to mean all these subjective different reasons, which is why the popularization of therapy speak is bad, because when people use it, they don't use it in the right context. When they use it in the wrong context, they go in, decharacterize people, they mischaracterize people, they patronize other people's mental illnesses, and they also decrease their mental health vocabulary, which is the also most important point of our practical points from the government side. The popularization of therapy speak usage makes people have a hard time expressing their mental health state because they use terms like depression to simply describe temporary sadness, or they mislabel nervousness as anxiety. Again, these labels are hurting people's vocabulary because when they are colloquialized, people aren't able to accurately describe what they're actually feeling in that manner. So instead of saying, I might feel nervous in this instance, people simply go straight for the gun to say that they have anxiety. This is bad because how are people able to express what they're feeling in that manner if they simply just resort to using therapy speak? And we've obviously expanded on why using therapy speak casually is a bad thing. Let's go on to the next point, which is being that of mislabeling people's characters. Again, when we call people toxic in a manner or willy-nilly call them out, we're practically watering down that term of toxicity, or other terms like ADHD. Now, why is this a bad thing? When we water down these terms, it's like the boy that cries wolf, for example. Every time that we say, you're toxic, when are we actually going to know if this person is actually, quote, toxic? When we use these terms willy-nilly, when we use these terms casually in a day-to-day basis, we really just lose the meaning of these words. We lose the impact of these words. Once we lose the impact of these words, they no longer actually hold the same weight that they used to, which is a bad thing because when people are actually referring to someone who is toxic, they're just going to refer to them as man. They're probably just bad in relationships, right? So let's go down the flow here today. When we look on the government side, we really didn't see anything much coming out of it. And when we saw on the closing side, we saw unique points, practical points, and an obviously very important principle argument here today. Thank you.
Okay, starting. So I'm going to begin with a little extension that was missing in every single team so far about how do people actually internalize therapy speak. Basically the narrative that therapy speak promotes, what therapy speak tells people. How do people internalize it? People internalize it in the sense that obviously people don't just think, and everyone says I'm depressed, they mean they're absolutely clinically depressed. I agree with every team so far. That doesn't make sense. When people think of therapy speak, people understand that these conditions exist within a spectrum. Why is that? That's because people understand that many diseases and disorders exist within a spectrum. There's also a lot of other countervailing narratives in society about medical advances and general like TikTok narratives that keep telling people how everything exists within the spectrum these days. So I don't think it's reasonable of any team to say that when someone says I'm depressed, they mean I'm clinically depressed. No. Why is this not a problem though? It's because again, when people understand that this exists within the spectrum, they realize that me saying I'm depressed when I'm a little sad doesn't actually dumb down or take away from the meaning of clinical depression. It's a different variation of depression in how we internalize it. It's a word. It's language. The fact that I'm using the word doesn't take away from another meaning of that word. A lot of words have different meanings in different contexts with different support that comes to them. So this is the missing element that takes us over every other team. Why? Because of the mechanization that this brings to. When people understand that these things exist within the spectrum, this achieves two things. One, it humanizes the conditions a lot more than what CG tries to tell you about it dehumanizing and taking away from the condition. Why? Because when people say, I'm depressed, yes, you realize that that's not necessarily clinical depression, but then you can associate with real depression. Why is this? Not right now. Why is this? Take an example of me saying, I'm OCD right now. This day, I feel very stressed. I feel like I have to clean a lot, and I'm calling myself OCD. This stress that this urge to clean today is giving me is not fun. I'm not enjoying this stress. And I'm associating that with the term of OCD. I understand that it's not clinical OCD, but I associate it with OCD. Why is this beneficial, and why does this humanize people with OCD? Because now I understand this one day of really bad stress and really bad feeling that I get, that I associate with OCD. Some people have it every day. Some people are clinically OCD and suffer from it consistently. This is a humanization that these terms actually bring when they're popularized into common language. This is why using this language is actually beneficial. Me saying I'm OCD doesn't take away from what people with real clinical OCD have. It just makes it more reasonable for me to empathize with them. Second mechanization of what this does is actually, not right now, is actually achieving more research. The thing that was missing in OG's case is, yes, they say that, and in OO's case actually, they say that people will just look into these things, but the link that they're both missing is, if you never hear about the condition to begin with, you're never going to research into it, regardless of whether the internet exists or doesn't exist, regardless of whether you go to a class about it or not. If you don't know it exists, you won't research into it, so the fact that the internet is there is meaningless. If you're asked about it, if your friend says, hey, I'm OCD right now, I really want to clean, then you're probably going to ask them, hey, what does this mean? Or you heard about this, so you're going to research because you're interested because your friend is saying, I have OCD. This sounds like a medical thing, so maybe I'm interested in seeing, maybe I can help my friend somehow. So I'm going to research into what OCD actually is and actually access the internet to begin with, which no other team can do. Secondarily, I think it's very unreasonable for both gov sides of the bench to say that when you just say that I have OCD, everyone takes you seriously or doesn't take you seriously at all. I think if I am very sad, for example, I went through a breakup recently and I was telling my friends how I'm like pretty depressed all the time. Obviously, I don't mean I'm clinically depressed. My friends don't think I mean I'm clinically depressed. But in fact, the first time I told my friend that, he asked, hey, are you okay? So yeah, I dial it down. I said I'm depressed and then I clarified, no, I don't mean I'm clinically depressed. I just feel really bad. Depression, saying the word depressed, because of the societal connotation with the word depressed, is the link to getting your friends to actually pay attention to you. Why? Because a lot of people, and this kind of clashes with the OG point about like the NHS shortage, a lot of people don't actually go to the NHS and doctors immediately when they think they have some problem. A lot of people, for cost reasons or time reasons or whatever, people prefer to get help from their friends and family, from the people around them because they're more familiar with them. But if I just tell my friend, hey, I'm a little sad, my friend might not even realize the extent to which I'm sad and the extent to which they need to help me. They might give me some advice, hey, like, you'll be better tomorrow, it's all okay. That doesn't help. But when I tell my friend, hey, I've been kind of depressed lately, even though they know I don't mean clinically depressed, they realize I've been having some sort of a problem lately that's actually persistent, actually affecting me, and they'll realize that they need to help me more. Second, on this point on the NHS shortage, no, not right now. I don't think that that OG is actually characterizing it pretty fairly. I think that, A, if you go to a doctor when you don't actually have clinical depression, the doctor is likely to tell you, hey, you don't have clinical depression. Why does this point just not stand on OG's case? Because I think on weighing, it's always better to go and check if you have clinical depression than to miss it, because the harm of missing it is so much more severe than anything else that you can get out of it. I'll take the POI from opening.
Let's just examine what you said. If I say I'm depressed to myself and my friends every day, at what point do you pass the threshold for them to realize that you're actually having
well, that's exactly the point. That's exactly the point. Like I said, you can dial it down. You can actually clarify it up. If I tell them I'm depressed and they don't realize how depressed I am, I can also tell them, no, friend, I mean I'm literally kind of depressed right now. You can help me. This is the characterization that you're missing. No more POIs. And another thing that clashes directly with the OG characterization is OG's own characterization of the people who use this terminology, the modeling in this round, basically destroys their entire case, because they themselves say that the people who use these terms mostly are the people who have the most access to these resources. So they themselves knife themselves in that sense, because yes, these people use it more, but while they use it jokingly in a sense, they know that they don't actually mean that. I don't actually see the harm of using it a little jokingly, because again, it enhances awareness and increases basically a sense of understanding on that condition. Also, just using it as a joke is not necessarily bad, simply because, again, Even if it's a joke, it's still a way to communicate with your friends. Moving on to CG and their arguments. First, they talk about a principle of dehumanization, clash that with our principle of humanization and increasing understanding. I don't agree that me saying I'm OCD actually dehumanizes anyone. I think that CG doesn't actually ever prove dehumanization in the sense that they don't actually show why me using this term takes away anything from the meaning of me using it for someone else. Next, when people understand that it's more on a spectrum, I think that's even more humane because people can then differentiate between different people. I think that even within clinical depression, there's a lot of different levels of clinical depression, so the more people understand that, the more humane it is. Next, on the marketplace of idea, I think discussion still happens on either side. I think that's symmetric. And weaponization in general, all of the impacts coming out of CG are actually pretty symmetric. I don't think that the use and popularization of therapy speak specifically is the tipping point to accessing any of their impacts. Because I think that even if I don't call it OCD, I think the counterfactual on their side, instead of me saying you're OCD, is me saying, hey, that's the weirdo who's obsessing about cleaning all the time. I think that's a lot less humane and a lot more mean and bullying. I think using OCD is good for the marketplace of ideas because the discussion on the condition still occurs, but the discussion on the condition in a way that's harmful to people doesn't occur, meaning we increase the marketplace of ideas and we are more humane at the same time. For those reasons, proud to oppose.
I really wish that I had my label maker today, because if I did, I would get all of our benches today, and I would probably label the closing opposition, probably a bit of avoidance since they refused to answer my question today. I might have come up here and said that I have OCD because I have lots of papers with me right now. I might label OO's the mischievous of people and individuals who are suffering from these diseases as a classic case of narcissism. And I'll probably even look down to the faces and the body language of my partner sitting on that table right there. That's a bit of having different issues with maybe social cues, not really know how to handle facial expressions. Now, that's exactly what the problem is within this round today. We see that we are taking away what's actually meaning of these words. Just because I'm talking with my hands doesn't mean that I have anxiety. There's other ways that we can approach conversation within our day-to-day lives to actually make these words accessible. As my lovely partner pointed out within her speech today, we can clearly see that there are harms in the status quo. Now, OO shows us today that there's only one harm given to us by the opening government, but what you can see from the expansion of, we see the closing government's case today, there is a laundry list of harms that people are refusing to look at within this round today. I'll take you on later on. As we move throughout the speech today, I'll be touching on the opening bench and then getting into that closing bench. So let's get into that opening bench right now. The principal argument today, talking from the opening government, talking about people being treated differently, having mental health versus physical conditions, talking about the issues of already having access to what these words mean, and even further talking about that we have to look at things not within a joking way, but people actually need to understand what they mean. And to this response, we can look at what's happening from the opening government today, that we have to look at the harmful to the future. Now, we agree once again with opening government and how they laid out today's round. We're looking at once again the issue that of the popularization rather than just normalization of different things. But to the responses to the opening government case from OO, they basically said we have to have a solid future. But the future that OO is advocating for is a future where mental disorders no longer have meaning. We can even see this within the closing government or closing opposition today, where they're saying we can use OCD every single day if I like to clean. But there's a difference in wanting to be tidy, and there's a difference in having OCD. We see the world that they're choosing to live in is diminishing the quality and the actual meaning of these disorders. The moment that everybody has OCD, I'll take you later, the moment that everyone has OCD is the moment that we're diminishing the quality or the actual meaning of what this disorder is. And it shows us that if everybody has something, the people who have this disorder, they're not special anymore, and they don't really have meaning in this. Moving further down, they talk a lot about how not everything is so cut and dry, once again from OO, but once again, medical disorders aren't really lucid. We see medical disorders are you have it or you don't. Us throwing this around in our day-to-day lives is definitely harmful to that of the status quo. We clearly see those harms and those effects of this whenever we look at our cases today. Moving further down, when they talk about the awareness, once again, from the opening government today, they talk a lot about issues that, they don't want to exist in a society where this is at all. But once again, we're talking about the issues of popularization. Moving further down to the closing or to the OO, the second speaker of the OO today, talking about how self-diagnosis is good and how they think it's good if other people look at your behavior. I don't know about y'all, but when I came up here and I labeled every single person in this room, even myself, that's not something that makes us feel good. If someone's telling me that I have OCD because I have lots of papers up here, that's not something that's probably going to make me want to go to the doctor because I have OCD. That makes me feel ashamed of myself. We see the popularization of therapy talk, on the contrary to what they want us to believe today, that it's beneficial and will drive you to go to the doctor. We see that's simply not the case. At the end of the day, we can clearly see within this top half of the panel that both sides are falling, because at the end of the day, we see a lot of points were dropped, and the status quo is definitely harmful. I'll take the first question from the back before I hop into that bottom panel today.
The conditions and disorders still exist on your side. The counterfactual to using therapy speak is not talking about them. It's the counterfactual is saying OCD as opposed to saying the weirdo obsessed about cleaning. So you're just going to be called the weirdo with a bunch of papers.
Well, that's not a question, that's a point. I'll just go ahead and move on to the bottom half of the panel today. Getting into that of the closing government today, that my partner laid out a beautiful case today and gave us 4 points of that. But before we get into that, let's discuss our principle. Once again, the principle argument that you have today, even if you don't buy those 4 key arguments that we brought forth to today, you can still buy our principle, and that can still win us today's round. Once again, the principle being that we are looking at everyone as a problem to solve, that we are devaluing them as human beings, and we look at them as patients, not even as friends. When people tell us their problems, or even simply that they're unique habits, we try to categorize them using therapy speak terms, and that is bad because we're essentially dehumanizing them, and we try to add a label on their quirks or their personality simply because we think that they may have autism or OCD when they are trying to organize their pens by color, or hate when their beans are touching their toast. Once again, at the end of the day, even if you don't buy our 4 key arguments out of the patronization, talking about different issues of the chilling effect, moving further down to weaponization, and now how people in the status quo such issues of toxic, we can still win on that principle argument. Moving further down to that of the closing opposition today, they talked about the issues on how narrative promotes different issues. But once again, if I'm coming up here with my label maker and giving everyone in the label up here, that's not promoting anything. Once again, that's dehumanizing it. It's degrading the quality or even the term of OCD, of toxicity, of different issues such as ADHD. At the end of the day, the more lucid these words become, the more times I throw them around, is the more times that these words are losing that meaningful thing. I'll take that last question.
You mentioned this idea of basically, well, it's harmful to point out things that are problems with people. Should we just not acknowledge people's problems? Should we just say this world is perfect and never talk about it at all?
Well, the perfect world that you're talking about is a world that you're wanting to live in. Now, on paper, therapy talk might seem great, but actually, in all reality, the government side is in the real world. We are off paper. So it might look great to have this, but the real world, we see the negative consequences and the negative connotations that both sides of government pointed out today, and that the closing government really harped out in our last speech and this speech once again today. Once again, at the end of the day, if you don't buy any of our 4 substantial points, we can still win this round on our principle argument. We are looking at people as problems. They're actively wanting us to judge everyone in this room and put a label on you. That's not what these medical disorders are. These medical disorders are actual disorders that people have, not just a elusive term. Once again, saying I have OCD as a clinical disorder is completely different from liking to be organized or wanting to be tidy. At the end of the day, we must oppose this House must oppose the popularization of therapy speak because of all the negative connotations that we have laid out today within this round. And with that, I can strongly encourage a ballot for side of the closing government. Thank you.
I'd like to begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Let's begin by rebutting some of the initial characterization that OG gave you. They told us at the very beginning of this debate that people are already aware of mental health conditions. I don't think this is true to the fullest extent that they characterize. What is the awareness that we have? Essentially, it's maybe your teacher told you about this specific condition and listed a few symptoms once in a class. What are the problems with this that we still have on their side of the world? First of all, when your teacher is just listing some conditions, you don't humanize it because you only see the conditions. You don't see the rest of the person behind these conditions, as in you don't see it as something that you could have, that your friends can have, someone that has a real life with family, friends, real life struggles that compound these issues. 2, because this is just something that you're told about, and you're unlikely to see every single one of these conditions in your everyday life, it's likely that you don't have the same amount of empathy towards them. You don't even see them as if they're real. You just see them as this kind of imagined thing. Why is this important in terms of OG's characterization? They essentially tell you that, look, people are already aware of mental health and there's nothing that you guys need to solve. I disagree for the reasons that I've just gave, and my partner tells you how we're able to solve this using therapy speech through the humanization mechanism that he talks about, through the way that you're able to now think about it. Next, I think OG essentially come up and they say, look, the biggest harm is that we are less able to recognize these conditions when they happen. Understand that you have the less severe versions of these conditions and the more severe versions of the conditions, and I'm going to rebut them in both situations. I'll accept later. Firstly, if you have someone who is very severely OCD, ADHD, depressed, often they have very physical symptoms. Like anyone around you can just tell that you're kind of doing these behaviors, that you have these very extreme things. And so in the most vulnerable people, the people who most need help, they're recognized on both sides. Therapy speech isn't going to mean, oh, we ignore this person, because it's likely that everyone else can tell that they need help. It's likely that they're going through a big thing and they recognize they need help. What does this leave? The milder cases, the people who they say, oh, now they cheapen it so they feel like they don't need help. Understand that this is a big issue that I agree with, but I agree that it happens on both sides. The reasons why people think, oh, my condition is too mild to go and seek help is because stigmatization. They associate this OCD, this depression, as that one thing they got taught in school as these extreme symptoms. It's not something that's talked about in everyday situations, so they feel like it's very extreme and it's very stigmatized, it's very taboo. The reason they then don't go and get help is because for this stigmatized taboo thing, in a world which has, as you say, has less resources, they feel like they don't want to use up the resources, they don't want to be stigmatized by having a diagnosis. And you don't solve these issues on your side, so I think this is symmetric. Next, you tell them that, oh yes, they're going to go to doctors and the doctors just aren't going to believe them. Firstly, you say that doctors are educated in medicine, so I think this is just a stupid point. Moving on, I think what we provide is the way that in the mild cases, people are actually able to understand the conditions by researching. My partner says that you're more likely to go away and research. At this point, you understand that you genuinely have a problem. You're then more likely to go and get help. And then we solve that initial problem of people not going to seek help for milder cases. I think that's all of OG. Moving on to OO, I think they make 2 or 3 main points. The first is saying that in everyday society, we need to be more empathetic towards people who have mental conditions, depression, experience toxicity. I agree, but I don't think they prove this. I think we uniquely prove this in our speech, because we essentially tell you that you become more empathetic, you become more humanized to these people. Now, I think that by this, we are logically prior. We are able to get this more consideration in these circumstances because we're just more comfortable with it. Next, they say that, oh yes, we're going to get people self-diagnosing more, and this is a good thing. I don't think they prove why in the status quo people can't just go and seek help from a medical doctor. They don't prove why it's so important that you need to self-diagnose. And so I don't think this is more important than the stuff we bring you about education. I'll accept it now.
Sure. So I'm so glad you're able to understand the difference between clinically and jokingly and feel extremely confident in your researching abilities. However, is that reflective of the general population?
Okay, I'll touch on research then to respond to the POI. Basically, my partner already says that you're more likely to research. A few more mechanisms for that if you don't believe it. First of all, when you hear this term for the first time, like someone saying gaslighting, you're like, oh, I don't know what this means. Let me go and research it because I feel pressure to kind of socially fit in. So it's a social need to fit in. Then 2, once you use this term in everyday language, you use it in different circumstances, you just become more curious. You're then more likely to go away and research it. 3, when someone uses it in a way that's different to the way you normally use it, you likely have a discussion over what the correct way to use it is. You likely come back to the original issue and discuss it in detail and find out what it actually means. 3, it's just like on your mind, so when you experience it, then you're more likely to think about it in this context. You're then more likely to research it to understand yourself better, and this is an incentive to go and research it. For all of these reasons, I think the general population does go away and research it, and then we're able to essentially rebut that POI. Okay. Next, in terms of CG, I think that one of their cases is like, oh, people weaponize therapy speech specifically. First of all, there are manipulative people in the world. They'll find some way to manipulate other people. I don't think therapy speech is like the unique way that they're going to do it. And understand that this is a very small impact, because how many extremely manipulative people are there in the world who are going to go away and do this? Okay. Now, I just want to properly impact what our case looks like. What does this whole idea of humanization actually look like, and why are these impacts that you should weigh above the other impacts in this debate? Essentially, when you are more empathetic to other people, when you're more humanized to them, you're more likely to go and talk to them if you see them doing these abnormal behaviors. As in, if you see someone acting OCD or ADHD, and you see this as something that, oh, I could do this, people around me do this, you're then you're more confident to talk to them because you see that they have the rest of their life. Next, you're more likely to go away and offer support to that person because you think, oh yes, like this is a person who is more complex than just their condition, and therefore you want to listen to them and what they're saying. This links to what my partner gave you in his speech, in that, oh yes, you're now like more comfortable engaging with your friend who says, I'm depressed, because you're more comfortable asking them about it and asking them to clarify it. In the alternative, you hear the word depressed and you're like, oh, I can't ask about this because it's like so taboo and I don't really know about it, and you're so uncomfortable with it. 3, I think the other mechanism that adds to my partners is the idea of stigmatization, which I think clashes a bit with some of the other things. So what my partner tells you is that the positive impact we should strive is like destigmatizing it so that you can tell your friends that you're depressed, and this is important. The reason it's destigmatized is that it's stigmatized in the status quo is because you don't want to tell people it at the point where you're worried that they think you're dehumanized. Okay, some final weighing. Even if I take, okay, on there.
And that was the culmination of our third and final debate here on the 27th season of the Montgomery Cup. So, Jack, that was certainly a debate that we just heard.
Yes, it was. A bit muddy.
Yes.
A bit convoluted, with both sides, I think, claiming ground from the other, and then going back and claiming the ground again. So, I don't know. I don't think there was a real clear delineation in some way between both sides.
Yeah, you used the term muddy. I wrote down the word messy.
Yeah.
I think either way, it kind of goes back and forth there. It was kind of a messy and a muddy debate, but I think we kind of get a little clarity towards the top half, or towards the bottom half of the top, and then towards the top of the debate as well. So it was really interesting to see how each of these teams tackled each of these issues. So looking at the closing government's strategy there, whenever they started to reframe the debate, you kind of looked at me and you said, not bad. Elaborate on that just a little bit more.
Well, I think that in my opinion, the opening government, I think, gets sort of bogged down by the idea of therapy speak, what it is, what it potentially can and cannot do, how it impacts people who both have the disorder or don't have the disorder. And really, the nuance that they probably should have taken more advantage of is the idea of the popularization. Right. It's not just the fact that it exists and how its mere existence can create problems, but the popularization. And so I think they gave us a little clarity in trying to frame that debate. I think it was a good move. I think it was a smart move, but, because I don't think we had that clarity up to then.
Right. So as we here you go.
Ow.
There we go. All right. So as we looked at that strategy, as we looked at that framework by the closing government, there's this term in BP called knifing that I'm still trying to figure out. Was that an example of a knife, in your opinion? Or a hard knife, soft knife, not a knife at all? What are your thoughts there?
Well, again, my opinion.
Right.
I think it's getting harder and harder to tell what is a knife and what is not a knife.
Hence why I asked.
Yeah. You might say that was a soft-ish knife because they reframed. But I think in this case it was justified because they were trying to get more clarity into the debate. A hard knife is usually from the bottom half is when the top half has gone way off on a tangent. You might use the example of, this house would limit the amount of illegal aliens in the country. And while you would expect to hear something about immigration and that sort of thing, and maybe the first government says, well, we're going to talk about little green men from Mars. Well, they're here, and they're not legally entering the country, and we ought to limit that. NASA ought to look into that.
Right.
Well, that's a goofy debate that's not going to go anywhere. Those kinds of things need to be knifed, and knifed hard. But the second half, the bottom half of the debate has every right to try to clarify, to try to take what's good from the top and expand on it. So I think we're getting a clear distinction sometimes. And I don't know, BP is always evolving. I've seen this kind of thing more and more over the last 5 years or so. So I think it was a good, soft knife.
Yeah, so you mentioned clarifying, and I think that was probably something that needed to happen.
Oh, yeah.
The top half of the debate, I think most everyone in this room would say, a little bit messy, a little bit disjointed, a little bit hard to follow. I think Jordan, in the whip position there of opening opposition, does a pretty decent job of trying to clear things up as much as possible, at least from opening opposition's position. But yeah, it became a little bit difficult, I think, at the top half of the debate, and we start to get a little more clarity, I think, with closing government, and making that adjustment and reframing in a way in which that bottom half of the debate can have a little bit of a clearer debate.
Yeah, I think Jordan was probably the strongest speaker on the top half, and really did try to give bottom half something, and the audience something to sort of pull out of that top half. I definitely feel like it was a bottom half debate.
Sure. Yeah, so this style of BP debate gets to feature teams from the same school on different corners, or teams from the same delegation, like we have with our teams. In other forms of BP debate, we typically have 4 different teams from 4 different schools. Am I correct about that?
That's correct.
So this gives us a unique opportunity to see how teammates often go against each other or often leave each other out of the debate.
Yeah.
And I found it to be kind of interesting that closing opposition really went hard at opening government, and almost, until that very last speech, almost completely left out opening opposition. So can you explain maybe the strategy there of going against your own team and keeping them in the debate, or do you think that's a poor choice?
I think it varies from team to team. Obviously we coach our delegation, or we coach our university to support one another, to try to keep the top half in the debate. But, some teams have a more individualistic sort of vein, and they decide to, go after, a person that normally would not be, opening government would not normally be from the same university as them.
Right.
So they're probably doing it out of habit, trying to fulfill their roles.
Okay.
I think it was more out of habit, than anything else. I don't think there's any animosity there. I think they're used to going after opening government in that position.
Right.
And they're used to then shifting to, closing government. I think the POI that Rebecca, is it Rebecca?
Yeah, the blonde from Lee College.
Right, that she offered. He got off on that, and I think, personally, kind of wasted a lot of time on that. And then when he tried to shift on to closing government, he kind of ran out of time. So that was a good strategic move on her part,
Yeah, and once again, POIs were kind of slim a little bit here. And it's also interesting as we talk about, which bench do you take the POI from? We often see, they'll take the question from their team in this format of debate. So again, it may be one of those things where they're doing it on purpose, or it may be one of those things where it's just habit. Okay, so last time I asked you to make a prediction. We don't know what's going on out in the hallway with our adjudicators. Do you have a prediction for this one tonight?
I think closing opposition probably will get the 1. I think closing government will get the 2. I think opening opposition will get the 3. And I think opening government will get the 4. So for us, essentially, it's a tie again.
Right.
I don't know. The 1 and the 2 could be flipped, and the 3 and the 4 could be flipped.
Well, I have the 2 and the 3 flipped for you.
Do you?
I do.
Yeah.
I have this as an op bench. But again, if that happens, we're once again faced with yet another tie.
Yeah. So you would put opening opposition as 2, closing government as 3?
Yeah, I thought so. I do wish that opening opposition would have been able to be kept in the debate just a little bit more.
Yeah.
It did seem like, it got off to a little bit of a messy start. But then I did think Jordan kind of pulled it out and kind of cleaned things up just a little bit. So I don't know. That's one of those areas where out in the hallway when
that's
the adjudicators are talking,
that
is more than likely what they're talking about. You and I could probably get to a point where we're like, my 2 and the 3 were pretty close, so I would be amenable to switching.
I could switch.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that we don't get to see, we don't get to hear.
Yeah.
We'll kind of hear a little bit of an explanation from the chief adjudicator or the speaker whenever Matt or Mac or I
think it's Mac.
Mac, okay.
Yeah.
So whenever they come in to deliver the ranks, the results, they'll try to give somewhat of an explanation of what was talked about out in the hall by all of our adjudicators.
Yeah, that top half of the debate really have to keep themselves in it by asking questions. And I don't, questions were asked mostly by the Prime Minister and mostly by Jordan. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of an even distribution between the speakers. So I don't know.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that they're trying to weigh out. Did they keep themselves in the debate?
Right.
Did they try to ask questions but were waved down, and you can't really count that against them? And when they did get a question in, was it a question that was, scored a point, as a punch, or was it, one of those whiffs, So it's in some ways, a good friend of mine, Art Reynolds, used to say it's kind of like watching a boxing match, and whether or not you can sneak a jab in underneath, and score a point that's going to tell later. So, always hard to, figure out how they're going to do it.
Yep.
But that'd be my guess.
All right. Well, anything else we need to discuss from this debate, from your perspective? Anything that we're missing? Anything that we need to maybe try to clarify for those who are watching at home?
No, I mean, I think it's important for students. There may be some people back home who say, why in the world, if you got college students talking about, therapy speak or, these big weighty issues, what does a college student know? And I think it's important for them, the viewers at home to understand that, yes, these college students may not be experts. They may not know everything there is to know, but how do you become an expert? How do you teach yourself? By engaging in debate, discussion, and you learn from other people in the debate. So I'm always kind of happy to see something that they sort of have to struggle with, and they really have to think about, because they'll walk away from this debate and, they'll think about, the impact of how they talk to other people and how we put labels on people and, how therapy speak might cheapen the other person's experience. And it just makes them, more aware and maybe more self-aware, makes them better citizens out in the world, So I'm always happy to see an odd topic sometimes, And
it seems like we've had our fill of odd topics on this trip.
Yeah, I think, we used to debate almost every round was something about international politics or economics or, and that's good. But unfortunately, the Brits have a different perspective on international politics than we do. And so sometimes it was hard for us to clash directly because we had such a different perspective. So I think over the last, 5-10 years, we've seen more and more of these sort of philosophical, nebulous, more, pop culture. Is that a, I'm old enough that pop culture doesn't mean, I'm not sure.
Right.
Yeah. I think we see more of this. And I think the students enjoy this kind of debate because they can get away from those heavy, topics that, threaten to overwhelm them.
Right. It's less policy-oriented and a little more on that value system of debate, which kind of gives, it leaves this open for more interpretations, more viewpoints, more vantage points, more of a worldview.
And it's more difficult in this format of debate, to take on policy type issues. You see that they don't quote a lot of what we'd call empirical, evidence, published evidence. They use examples. They can refer to things that they know in common knowledge.
Sure.
So it lends itself well to issues of value, issues of fact.
Yeah. And many of the reasons why they stick with ideas that they already know is because during prep time with this format of debate, we're not allowed to do research or to
Right.
use the internet like we're used to in IPDA or parliamentary debate or cutting cards in Lincoln Douglas debate. This is very much off the top of your head.
What do you know?
What do you know?
Yeah. And that's
how
why,
much do you know?
and I think, to be fair to the opening top half of the debate, I mean, they've had 15 minutes.
Right.
They're trying to make a clear, coherent case, but they're not real sure exactly where this thing's going to go. Whereas the bottom half has 4 speeches that they get to listen to and say, oh, okay, that's the way we're going to do it. And then they have time to react, to think, to strategize amongst themselves. So, the top half of the debate very often is kind of, I think the first 2 speeches, unless you have an extremely strong prime minister or an extremely strong leader of the opposition, it tends to be kind of muddled, a little messy at first. And then as we get deeper into the debate, clarity begins to assert itself. We begin to understand what we mean by terms. We come to some sort of tacit agreement of what it is we're debating. And that's what you saw in the second half, where the second government basically kind of clarified and refocused, So, I mean, had that come out in the first speech, it probably would have been different. But, this format, I think, is a good format to teach them how to think quickly, think on their feet. Because in real life, there are going to be a lot of situations where somebody has a question or, somebody calls down to your office and says, hey, in 15 minutes the dean's coming down. We need to convince him we need funding for XYZ. Throw something together.
Right.
You don't have a whole lot of time to, you just got to go down and be smart and persuasive.
Sure. And I guess something else that we should mention during the prep time is that, generally in IPDA and in parley debate, they have the ability to be coached.
Right.
We can sit and we can kind of talk through ideas with them. That does not happen in this style of debate. It is you and your partner.
Right.
And that is it. So not a lot of back and forth as far as coaching help. It's all very clearly what they know and what's coming off the top of their head. So, it's about 8:15 here in London this evening. So once we hear back from our adjudicators, I believe we're going out for burgers with the Imperial College Debate Union. So we're definitely looking forward to that and being able to chat with them. They're actually, it's kind of cool to see. You can probably hear in the background a lot of talking going on.
Yeah.
But they're mingling with each other and chatting and getting to know each other already. So I think that's one of the really cool things about this trip and about what we do. Is it's not just about what happens in the lecture hall, in the debate theater. It's also what happens both before the round and then after the round as well, and getting able to meet each other and get to know each other and ask questions and learn about different cultures. Just a really cool thing to see whenever we see our students interacting with others. And their students interacting with other coaches here.
Well, and I've tried to explain, because back home people have certain perceptions.
Sure.
You're gone for 2 weeks in the UK. It started out to be really focused on the debate and trying to teach students a different format of debate. But very quickly, I came to realize that there was so much more to the trip that we really need to take advantage of. And so we started developing, the history part of it. We started developing the culture part of it. We started engaging in more social events with the unions and the students here. We've delivered lecture series. We've exchanged ideas on different formats of debate. About 10 years ago, we worked the DMP in, giving them an opportunity to learn how to set up in a remote place. We started doing these shows so that people back home, it wasn't quite so boring, I guess, to watch a debate. So it's a whole lot more than just the debates. When there's a picture, I don't know if Shelby, our graduate assistant, has shown it to you yet, but it's a picture of Gracie, one of our kids. And they went to see The Phantom of the Opera last night. And so Shelby took a picture of Gracie at intermission, and it's just, it is if you want to educate kids and you want to see the light go on when they have that aha moment, that's the picture. Because watching these kids' faces light up when they see the Tower of London, when they see a London theater production, when they get to roam around, Edinburgh Castle and all the history and watch them, it comes alive for them. And they're not going to get that sitting in a classroom, I don't think I'm a great teacher, but I'm smart enough to realize that there are things that can only be taught outside. You have to put that practical, where the rubber hits the road kind of education. And I really, our university is really dedicated to that. Our dean and I know Dr. Best and the provost have always been very supportive of getting out of the classroom and getting out into the world. So, education for a greater degree, and part of that is this, getting outside the classroom. But we've always, where else could you go, I don't know, where you could keep something like this alive for 20-something years,
sure.
And that's not because of any one person. That's an administration that's behind you that want to see these kids have this kind of experience. It's donors that are willing to put money into this because they want to give back, because they've seen firsthand what this is like. So it's a community that we've built over these years to get this opportunity for our kids. And we've added LSUS and Lee College, and we hope to expand and give other universities an opportunity,
Yeah, and this is my first experience with this trip. It's been incredible. It's been overwhelming at times as well. For anyone that thinks that we are on a vacation, you're wrong. I talk to me. We can have that discussion.
Hurting 24 people.
It has
the
been
subway.
Yeah, it has been an experience. And we had UCM. We had 3 different groups going off to the theater last night. So whenever I was checking in and making sure that everybody had returned back, I asked them, how was it? And many of the responses were life-changing.
Yeah.
And it's not just going to that show and seeing Wicked or seeing Phantom or seeing Book of Mormon. It's this entire experience is life-changing for all of our students who likely would not have the opportunity to have this experience, to come overseas, to study abroad for 2 weeks. It's absolutely a life-changing experience for them, and I've watched from miles away over the last few years as I was following along with these debates and chatting with you and chatting with Nikki, and I don't think I really understood.
You have to come on.
Yeah. You have to be here to
it.
really understand what happens here.
I mean, you got students like Caleb Dillon. Never flown on an airplane,
Yeah. Yep.
and so watching him realize that he was at 35,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, you know, and he just, it's eye-opening. I mean, all of the students that have been on this continually, and I keep up with most of them on Facebook, and I know it's an antiquated way of doing it, but they'll all, you know, say how much it changed their life. You know, one of my favorite stories is a gentleman by the name of Scott Kutenkiller, who is from Tipton, and he was a debater for me, and I brought him over here, and he debated and did well here. He did well back in the States. But when I first met him, his whole ambition was just to go back to Tipton, you know, and do whatever he needed to do in Tipton. And now he's one of the senior executives at Southeast Arkansas at a university, you know, and working his way up, you know. Keith Peterson, you know, is out. I believe he's the vice provost out in Colorado. I mean, these are kids that came from, let's just say, a background that probably was a bit of a challenge for them, you know. Mariah Siddharth, she just loved it, you know, was probably not, you know, real confident in her abilities, and then something happened. About halfway through the trip, something happened, and she just came alive, you know, and she continues to donate. You know, it's just something, you know. It's as an educator, I don't know how I would replace it with anything else. But it's, yeah, you're right. It's not a vacation. I'm exhausted.
Yeah. We're all very tired. We're all probably a little bit sick. We're all probably a little sick of each other. But no, it's been really interesting to see the team building and the team bonding, and then the interactions between our teams from UCM and LSUS and Lee College, seeing how everyone is getting along. Mingling with each other. Like, we didn't know Lee or LSUS the way that those two schools knew each other. And that was pretty clear at the very beginning. We're like, oh, okay.
Who's that guy?
They know each other.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
But to be able to see how they've kind of grown together, and, you know, like, I'm pretty sure everyone knows everyone's name. By now. Even with this group of 24 or 25 people.
Yeah.
And also seeing, you know, like, I think we also need to mention our DMP folks as well. You know,
absolutely.
Shannon and Emily and Cass absolutely doing a great job. And I think that they're really enjoying getting to know everyone on this trip as well, being able to experience everything here together. You know, like, they're here to work, and they know that, but they're getting their work done, and they're doing a great job with some of the challenges that have come up with some of the infrastructure, I guess. Like, this room setup is weird, right? Yeah. we're at the back of an elevated lecture hall, so we've had to kind of make some changes here and there, and they adapted perfectly, right? So absolutely great to have them with us, to be able to do this and to broadcast back home.
Yeah, they came along last year with Shannon, and they did such a good job last year. I invited them to come again this year. They just, Shannon, I wish Shannon had a bigger crew. I wish there were ways that we could make this opportunity available to 5 or 6, DMP people. It would certainly make things easier on Shannon.
Sure.
Getting things set up, and they're like their own little television studio.
Yeah.
I mean, they haul all this equipment, and they get it all set up very quickly and tear it down sometimes even faster than they should, because we have to get out of the room. But yeah, they're trying to get all of this accomplished, and at the same time trying to enjoy the trip, Yeah, they're great. Both of them.
So the debate about the debate is continuing on.
One of them is holding up a phone saying, "Next year?" Question mark? Question mark? Yeah, maybe. Who knows?
We'll see. We'll see. Assuming we survive this year's stuff.
Yeah, well, that's true.
We do still have 2 full days of London ahead of us before we fly out really early on Saturday. And get back to the States Saturday afternoon. So I know that many people are wanting to go back to the theater. You and I are going back to the theater tomorrow night. We're seeing Phantom, so I'll see if I can get a picture of Jack looking the same way that Gracie looked.
Probably
last
not.
night.
I've seen Phantom about 10 times.
But you haven't seen it with me, so we'll see. Whenever I start singing along, you will be moved. I can almost guarantee you that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd have to hear it.
But yeah, we have several other things tentatively planned. These are pretty much free days. You took us on a tour whenever I guess that was yesterday, to kind of get us acclimated. And you took us on a little bit of a tour on Monday night as well to get us all acclimated to the area, showed us all of the major hot spots, I guess, whenever it comes to attractions that we should see. UCM and Lee College actually went to the Tower of London this morning to be able to view that. We saw the crown jewels, so that was really interesting to see there. But I know that we have some folks who are maybe going to Westminster Abbey over the next couple of days.
LSUS went to the zoo, so we try. You say free days.
Yeah,
they are sorta, but what we try to do is get together as coaches and what do your kids want to see,
right?
And then you may have a group that's led by you going to the tower that has kids from all 3 programs. Some of our kids may want to go to the zoo because there's so much to see and do in London that you really want the kids. One of our debaters from LSUS is a wildlife biology major. So she really wanted to go to the zoo. Caleb Dillon is going to be a history teacher. So he really wants to see the historical stuff. And since you have such a short time, you try to direct them into things that they'll remember, things that they'll learn from. Because if you force them to go somewhere they don't want to go, they're not going to learn.
Right.
Yeah. And I force them to do some things, but you try to give them their own leash, I guess, whatever you say.
Yeah, sure.
But that's nerve-wracking because, I'm up watching the message thing at 11:30 at night going 1 little, 2 little, 3 little. Oh, where's number 4? Yep. Oh, my goodness. Oh. Well, there they are. There they are. Okay, they're back. That group's back. And you've got faculty with them. I don't know why I worry, but you can delegate the job, but you can't delegate the responsibility. I worry about everybody, So,
yeah, we are still waiting. There must be a heck of a debate going out in the hallway.
Yeah, usually when an adjudication goes this long, it's because I would probably guess that they're arguing the 2 and the 3.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out their order 2, 3. That's usually the sticking point between sides. So, be interesting to see what they do.
Well, I've lost track of what day this is. I know it's a Wednesday, but I don't quite recall how many days we've been here. We do know we have 2 full days remaining and then our flight back on Saturday. Of course, we started off this trip in Edinburgh, Scotland.
Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful place, beautiful location. pretty different than what we're experiencing here in London, because we hopped on the subway, and I do believe this was or this morning we hopped on the subway to get to the Tower of London. So I'm pretty sure that was some of our students' first experiences with a subway as well. So not only the flight over here, but also the subway. But we experienced the subway during rush hour here in London. So that was really interesting to see faces, sometimes panicked faces as we were trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to be able to get everyone in the same car? What's our stop? Where do we get off?
And yet we lost no one.
No one. So the leadership.
No soldier left behind.
Absolutely. So excellent leadership. Making sure, and we had multiple people. We have several adults on this trip who were very concerned about making sure that we had everybody with us. But we were able to pull that off. We're hoping that the trip back this evening will be a little less adventurous.
Should be.
So
the crowd goes away and then the crazies come out.
There we go. Yeah, it might be a little more entertaining, but we might have a little more space at least.
Right. Oh, it'll be entertaining.
Yeah, absolutely.
Always fun.
So we started off at Edinburgh, Scotland. Then we went off to St. Andrews, another just absolutely beautiful location, and talk about a slower pace of life. Where we were just kind of able to just kind of rest, breathe and still take in the sights, still take in the scenery. Absolutely beautiful place. I said to someone that the sky seemed bluer where we were, and then I heard someone else who has actually been on this trip before say the exact same thing, is that, wow, this sky was much bluer than they remember seeing. We've had really great weather.
Yeah. For the most part. I mean, it rained a little, but it is Britain.
Yeah, it did rain a little bit towards the beginning of the trip, and it's sprinkled off and on here today. I think our next 2 days are going to be a little
wetter.
Yeah, so that umbrella that I did not pack, yikes. I might have to make a stop at a convenience store before I hit the town tomorrow.
You need to get one of those little small that and it's a map of the London subway, and that way you can check your umbrella when you're trying to navigate.
There you go.
Yeah, 2 for 1.
Yeah.
I think you can get one for about £4.
I probably still have 4 pounds remaining.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we did Edinburgh, we did St. Andrews, then we moved on to Durham, in England. And again, another opportunity to kind of rest a little bit. But wow, we had a great debate at Durham. We were able to get in a couple of spars, as they like to call them, or practice debates. So that was really great, and we were able to get a lot of our students involved.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we weren't able to have every student that we have on the trip appear on one of our broadcasts. We did what we could, but whenever you have 3 teams with 4 to 5 people each, it became a little bit difficult there. So, but we did what we could. There in Durham, we found ourselves in the middle of a festival. On that Saturday, I believe it's called Fire and Ice. Yeah, the Fire and Ice Festival. I don't know how many thousands of people we were told were there, but
a lot.
It was in the multiples. And then we have the Six Nations rugby tournament, I believe, going on. So many of the pubs were filled and packed, and we had Premier League matches, football, soccer, whatever you want to call it, going on. So it was extremely crowded there in Durham. But again, a little bit of a change of pace, a little bit of a time for us to be able to go through the cathedral, which is absolutely beautiful. That leads us here to London, and I think all of our students have had just an outstanding time with us. I think our coaches are all very happy about this trip as well. They've been able to provide the experiences for their teams that they've wanted to provide. And like I said, these next 2 days, while I said they were free, they're not exactly free. You know, they're definitely going to be
unstructured.
doing everything they can.
Yeah, cramming it all in.
Cramming it all in as much as possible before we take off on Saturday. So, Jack, I've been asking lots of questions in these wrap-up shows, and one of those questions was, what's your favorite experience been so far? So do you have a favorite experience from this trip? Anything that really stands out besides going to the Book of Mormon with me last night?
Well, that was kind of the low point. It's tall guy in front of me. People ask me about the towns, or they ask me about, seeing this or seeing that. And for me, it's all about the students.
Yeah.
Watching them as they engage is the high moment for me. That picture of Gracie, hearing them on the bus, talk about the things they saw or the things they did, reading the message, at night, life-changing, and, oh, girl, I, really love this. You got it, For me, that's the high point,
right.
And watching some of these students, because I'm not actively coaching with you anymore. I travel to a few of the tournaments and things, but I'm not actively coaching. So I don't know a lot of these students very well. And I've gotten the chance to sit down and talk to them and interact with them, and some really interesting stories, and some really interesting people.
Yep.
And it's always fun to get to know students, what makes them tick. So, keeps you young.
Yeah, and you absolutely learn more about them whenever you spend so much time together and see each other every day, and you're able to chat with them and ask them about their day, ask them how they're doing, ask them how they're feeling. Like, we get to see how they react in certain high-pressure situations.
Yeah.
Like, we generally get to see that anyway in this activity that we do of forensics and speech and debate, but we don't always get to see what happens in the round at tournaments because we're off judging our own rounds or running tab room or something else like that. But to be able to kind of see them and to see how they adapt and to see how they're learning how to read a subway map, trying to figure out how to turn on a shower, or asking questions about that, because or how does this key work on my door?
I have a few of those.
Yeah, so there have been a few exciting moments, I think, for them, where most of the time they just figure it out, but after a while I think there's like, okay, help.
Yeah.
Speaking of help, I wonder if we need to send out a search party for our adjudicators.
I don't know.
I think they may have went to go get burgers already.
Without
just
us.
left
us. I don't know.
Maybe we didn't get the memo.
We're going to get kicked out of the room here pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah,
Usually they try to lock university buildings at 9.
Yeah.
And it's about 1:45.
I've noticed that the individual that picked us up from the subway station, that you've been chatting with and that's helped to organize this, they've been on their phone quite often. They're kind of pacing around a little bit and trying to maybe hurry things along a little bit as well. So I think those nerves are starting to happen. But
we're opening the
door.
Here they come. Here they come.
So we're going to turn it over to Mac for the reading of the results, and we will be back immediately after.
Okay. Where do you want me to stand, or is everything okay? Great. Sorry about the wait, everyone. We just wanted to make sure the call was correct and accurate, and we had a really long discussion. So I'm going to tell you what the call is, guys, and then I'm going to explain the justification for that, going through the teams in the order they spoke, and explaining why the teams placed the way they did. I want to be clear, there was one comparison that was extremely tight, and that's why we discussed it at length. And I think a lot of it had to do with maybe differences in the way that you judge in BP compared to other styles that the Americans have done. Eventually, we decided to side with the Americans and what they thought on this. So I hope that comes clear as the call goes through. So the call that we eventually came to unanimously was, and you all sat in the wrong places, guys, by the way. It's so confusing. like they sat on the other side. Okay, but the call that we eventually came to was the first to closing opposition, you guys. The second to closing government, you guys. The third to opening government, and it was on the government bench that it was extremely tight. And the fourth, unfortunately, to opening opposition. By the way, guys, because you sat in the wrong positions, I'm sorry if, I point to the wrong team or something when I say something. It's just...
I see the side and you said opposition here. So
sorry, it's my fault then, I didn't realise. Okay, so I'm just going to bring in the teams in the order they spoke, explain what they said, and the reason they placed the way that they did. So, what does opening government bring? So the first thing they do is they try to characterise it, that people are already aware of mental health problems. We do find there is a lack of analysis though. They try to claim that in the certain circles where they use therapy speak, such as inner city areas and amongst young people, that these people are already aware of it. The issue that we have here is, even though this case is quite strategic, in the sense that they're trying to claim that everybody's aware of this anyway, so therapy speak doesn't make people more aware of it, I'm not exactly clear analytically why it is the case that these specific groups are the only groups that therapy speak affects, such as in people in inner city areas and young people, or why that these people are aware of therapy or are aware of mental health problems. It's not exactly clear to me that people are, in the status quo, completely aware of mental health problems. What we do buy, though, from opening government is that their main case is on, I'm going to try to get the exact word that they use, trivialization. So people feel that mental health problems are trivialized by therapy speak, and then there is various impacts stemming from it. The three mechanisms, as we'll call it, over why therapy speak trivializes mental health problems are, firstly, that it detaches it from its actual medicalization. It's not exactly clear what opening government means by that and why this actually trivializes it. But the two that we do buy are, secondly, they desensitizes people to it because they hear about these things all the time and they become desensitized to the idea of mental health problems. And thirdly, it reduces the severity that people see mental health problems as having, because obviously the therapy speak is applied to cases where things are less severe. The impacts that they have stemming from this then are, firstly, that you often don't go to the doctor because you don't feel necessarily that what you have is necessarily severe enough. Secondly, that doctors and professionals don't take you seriously because of the fact they feel that, oh, you just have a casual thing, you just have some OCD and it's not actually a medical problem. And thirdly, that your friends don't take you seriously because they feel it's a joke, it's this thing of therapy speak that you have and not a real mental health problem. I will also mention now that in Deputy there is also another case coming as well, which is that some states have limited resources to deal with these things, and now there is too many people going to the doctors with this. We do feel, once again, there is a lot of analytical links missing in this. Firstly, the NHS is a very UK-specific example. I'm not necessarily sure why in other states and in other countries there is a lack of resources. And secondly, I'm also not sure why everyone goes to the doctor now, especially given your prior analysis saying people don't go to the doctor now. So it's actually a contradiction of your first speech. And as we talked about at length, a lot of the second speech had contradictions to the first speech in it. So under the rules of BP, these were ignored and discounted in the adjudication. Okay, bringing in opening opposition. And why does opening government place over opening opposition? So opening opposition does a few things, but their main pushes are claims, particularly coming from the LO, their main push is claims of that you can understand yourself better, that you can you have more equitable society and you can talk about these things more. Now, the issue that we have is we don't necessarily understand how this links to the motion and how this is comparative under the motion. That is, the motion is there is a popularization of therapy speak, which is the use of medical terms about mental health problems in a casual way. It is not clear why using medicalized mental health terms in a casual way leads to these things. That is, there is not the analysis linking it to the motion that shows comparatively why the use of medical terms in a casual way leads to more understanding of yourself, leads to more equity, and leads to the benefits that they talk about. They do, I would say, and this is where the panel had some disagreement at first, within the DLO, give some examples of necessarily how this may manifest, and do say that people are willing to talk about this more. The issue that we have, though, is there's a lack of a structural reason, as we'd call it in BP, or an actual mechanistic reason, a justification over why it is the case. You're sat in different positions. I'm looking at these guys. There's a lack of a explicit justification over why systemically people do have this greater awareness, and why this greater awareness leads to the benefits that you are talking about. We do think you have some rebuttal to the second case coming out in Deputy from Opening Government about overuse of mental health services, etc., which is that people can now look themselves and self-diagnose, and this is a good thing because it reduces stress on medical services, because people self-diagnose and go to the internet instead and treat themselves. We do think this rebuts Open Government, but as we said, this isn't their strongest material anyway, and it in itself, once again, has the issues of just not being impacted or weighed enough or analysed enough. Bringing in closing government. And this is where we had most of the discussion, comparing particularly the Gov Bench. Now, closing government bring a lot of cases, and we do think they are proven and well analysed. So the first one is what they call their principal case of dehumanisation. In BP, we wouldn't really call this a principal case, just because it is ultimately utilitarian in impact. That is, the impact is that people feel dehumanised and people feel patronised, and therefore they feel bad. So it's ultimately a case where the end result is a utilitarian one. It's one of people feel unhappy. So we feel that it is not necessarily a principle in that sense, but it is still a utilitarian case, and it's a good case. The second case then that we... so the second case that we feel is the strongest is also then on manipulation, how people can use these things to manipulate people because they say, oh, I have this, and then they use these medicalized terms, which may mean that you can manipulate people because you're saying something that sounds now like you have to take it seriously, and therefore you can manipulate people in a way that you can't if you don't have therapy speak. And you have a few other cases on this. The third thing that you say on the chilling effect and the fact that people don't want to, maybe this is a difference in culture to some extent, but how you feel like you can't talk about these things because of trigger warnings. We feel it's not necessarily comparatively proven, because it's not necessarily proven why you can't talk about more things because you're using medicalized terms to describe them. Even if I am to believe that, though, I'm not sure exactly how many cases this is, especially when it's also kind of a knife of your opening as well, and a contradiction of your opening, to the extent that they say that people will not take things seriously now, and you're saying the opposite, that people will take everything seriously now, if you understand that. The other cases then that you do bring are that it's hard for people to describe themselves because these words are... because of the fact these words are becoming more trivialized. We do think this is similar to your openings point. We do think it's new, but it is similar to your openings point. And then, so those are the cases that we believe that you have. Now, we think you beat opening opposition because we do think you have a well-analysed comparative case that does link to the motion in the way that opening opposition doesn't have. We had a very long discussion on Gov Bench. I think there are some differences in the way that British and American, or not even British and American, but BP and the styles of debate that you do judge. Eventually, we did come to a consensus decision that CG do take it over OG. And we have two broad reasons for this. Firstly, we believe their case is better proven. That is, the analysis does prove directly the impact of their case, which is that people feel patronised by this and people can manipulate people. Also, we feel in opening at times the impacts are stretched, should I say, and dissociated from their analysis. That is, even though I do buy the analysis that people become desensitised to these things, it is not necessarily clear how that desensitisation then leads to professionals not taking you seriously or you just not going to the doctor. Even though we are willing to buy those impacts, we're not willing to buy them to the full extent because we do feel they are somewhat stretched from the analysis that is there. And secondly, the other justification we come to is, even though it's not necessarily clear on weighing and it's not necessarily clear why the closing team weigh their impacts as more severe than their opening team, we do, as in, for example, it's not clear how many people get manipulated or like how much you care about the severity of dehumanization that you experience. We are willing to buy that these are at least fairly impactful, at least compared to some of the impacts coming out from opening opposition, such as friends not taking you seriously. And then when it comes to the other two impacts about not seeing professionals, as we've said, we're not necessarily willing to buy them to the full extent because we don't feel necessarily that it's proven as well as it could be. Bringing in CO, I think this is the team that was clearest in the debate, and it was clear that they took it first to us. So what is closing opposition's case? And as I bring this in, I may explain why they beat opening government and closing government as they go along, just to make this clear. So they do a few things. The first thing that they do is framing to explain that people can understand that these things lie on a spectrum. They do this giving two reasons. A, just that many things do exist on a spectrum, so people are able to understand this. And B, woke TikTok culture basically often says that things are on the spectrum a lot, so young people, etc., are used to hearing this idea. This does mitigate a lot of the impacts coming from both government teams, because if you are willing to understand that it's on a spectrum, you are not necessarily going to, in terms of closing, dehumanize people as much with this label, because of the fact you know that there's a difference between those who have it severely and those who have it minorly. But also when it comes to opening, you're not likely to have your friends necessarily joking if you have a serious mental health problem, because they are able to perceive the difference between those serious mental health problems and the minor ones, and therefore are likely to take you seriously if you have a serious one and joke if you have a joking one. The same with healthcare professionals as well. There is also some explicit rebuttal to this that comes in WHIP as well, where WHIP just also to say that healthcare professionals are just professionally trained and do know what they're talking about and are likely to take you seriously. Carrying on with the CG case then, so the CO case, you then explain, firstly, that actually people can relate to these individuals more, because now they think, maybe the little bit of OCD that I'm using in therapy speak now as well, maybe they think this trait that they have of OCD now is relatable to these individuals that have actual medical OCD, and therefore they feel they can relate to these individuals more. Secondly, they do their research on this now because of the fact they hear about this more. And thirdly, their friends pay attention and care about these people more, because when you go, I'm feeling a bit OCD, and you use this medicalized terminology, it gives it a certain weight which makes you care about it, because it makes it sound like you have a severe problem that otherwise it doesn't make it sound like you have. The reason we believe then that CO takes it over opening opposition is because, and this was explicitly said by the member speaker in opposition, that they fill in the gap within the opening by explaining why it is the case that people actually become more aware about these things, because they fill in the mechanism when they say that people hear about this more and they go online and they do their research, and therefore they gain a greater understanding about these things. Because we feel they do the analysis that the opening opposition is missing, we feel they take it over opening opposition for those reasons. The reason then that they take it over opening government, to go through the opening government's case, is firstly, as I say, we already believe that they largely mitigate a lot of the material by showing that people can perceive things lie on a spectrum and can understand that because you maybe use therapy speak, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the same thing as having the more severe cases. So when an opening opposition says, firstly, that you don't go and you don't go to a professional, you don't go to a professional because you only think this is a mild thing. This is rebutted in two ways by closing opposition. Firstly, by the way, as I've just said, by explaining people do understand this lies on a spectrum, but secondly, by also explaining very explicitly that if you have a severe case, you are likely to have symptoms of this anyway, and therefore you're likely to go to a doctor regardless, and you're likely to have other symptoms that make people realise. Secondly, on professionals, they do just explicitly rebut this in opposition whip, where they say professionals are just well trained and they do know how to differentiate these things. Thirdly, then, on your friends taking you seriously, they win over this in a number of ways. A, because of the spectrum things that I just mentioned, but B, they actually flip this completely by saying your friends actually now relate to you more and take you more seriously and help you more because of the fact they think you have more of a serious condition, even when it is something that is more minor, and also the fact that actually people can actually relate to you more because they feel that their little bit of OCD, as they call it, is something that is similar to the more severe cases, so they get more empathy for these people. Also as well, they do rebut then the case coming from opening government about having more, having not enough resources for the health service, by explaining that actually your friends will help you more, and this takes over the opening's rebuttal because it now explains why it is that your friends help you more and you can actually self-help yourself because your friends take you more seriously and they listen to you. To do the back half comparison then, on the first and second, they rebut closing government in a similar way to the way they rebut openings government by explaining that people don't actually dehumanise you now, but people now can relate to you more because of the fact, as I've said before, their mechanism being that people feel their little bit of OCD is somewhat more relatable to the bigger, worse conditions that people have, and because of that, it doesn't. And this is very explicitly, I want to be clear, done by both speakers in closing opposition. It's very explicitly explained that you don't actually get the dehumanisation that closing government talks to you about because of the fact people actually relate to you more now and actually dehumanise you less. On the manipulation point as well, I don't think this is rebutted by closing opposition. It is left standing, but because I am willing to believe, to be clear, that if you do want to help your friends more, it is easier to manipulate them, but I just don't think this is sufficiently weighed from closing government. Like I said, I don't know necessarily how many instances of abuse beyond the example that you give happen. I'm not sure necessarily this, even though I'm willing to believe there's a severe impact, I'm not sure necessarily how often this happens, while the impacts coming from closing opposition are systemic and happen throughout the whole of society and impact necessarily everyone to some extent, as in everyone who at least buys into therapy speak gets more empathetic. So I'm willing to still believe that CO takes it over closing government. If anyone wants any feedback or personal feedback or advice on how to get better in debating, please come to me as standard in BP. I hope you all enjoyed the debate, everyone.
Well, Jack, we were both wrong. Maybe we weren't wrong, but we did not necessarily agree.
Yeah,
again,
this 3-4 flipped, but
yeah,
Yeah.
Okay, well,
we had the 1 and the 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You did at least. I didn't.
Well, yeah, but
all right. So as a reminder, the 1 went to closing opposition, the 2 went to closing government, so it was a bottom half debate. The 3 went to the opening government, and the 4 went to opening opposition. So definitely a bottom half debate here. Any last thoughts before we sign off?
No,
Okay.
not necessarily.
Alrighty. Well, hey, we hope that you will tune in to our last wrap-up show that we hopefully will be recording maybe Friday morning, I believe. So we'll try to get that posted and or aired live like we've been able to do the last couple of times. So be on the lookout for that. A link for that being posted sometime on Friday. No other last words?
Nope.
Alrighty, so we are going to sign off here from Imperial College here in London. Again, do look for that last wrap-up show sometime on Friday morning. It'll be early Friday morning in the States if we're able to record on Friday morning, but you'll always be able to access these videos at a later time. So
Right.
for Dr. Jack Rogers, I'm Jordan Compton. We hope to see you again on Friday.